Hello and welcome to November's Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live. My name is Rachel Schofield. I'm one of the senior facilitators with Shape Talent, an award-winning diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy which is working to support large multinational organisations who want to get serious about gender equality. We are delighted to have you join us today as we tackle another topic, teeth in, on the subject of gender equality. And this one is a really interesting one. But before we dive in, I've said hello, I've told you who I am, and in a moment I will introduce our two guests, but I'd love to know who you are. So tell us in the chat where you are joining us from, if you would, and do by all means share a little bit about what has brought you here today. We are all London-based, the three of us today, but I suspect that we can go a little bit further than that if people would like to share where they're joining us from. So today we are asking a question, and an important one. What does a gender inclusive succession strategy look like? Specifically, a succession strategy that incorporates the C-suite, that talks about your leaders and that pipeline that brings a really diverse range of people into leadership positions. And tackling that question with me today are Shape Talent's founder and CEO, Sharon Peake. Welcome to you, Sharon.
Hello, nice to be here.
Great to have you with us. And also we're delighted to welcome Hilary Dodsworth, who is partner and regional leader of the DEI practice for EMEA at Executive Search and Leadership Consultants, Stanton Chase, London. Thanks so much for being with us, Hilary.
Thank you for inviting me, much appreciated.
Wonderful. And whether you sitting joining us either live or in the replay are a CHRO, head of talent, EDI leader, a champion for change in your organisation, we're delighted to have you with us as we unpick this topic. And what we're aiming to do, as always with our LinkedIn Lives, is to give you actionable insights, things that actually drive meaningful progress. So what we're going to be doing is thinking about strategies that help you spot and fix leadership pipeline gaps. We're going to think about how you might remove selection bias that is costing you talent, and also how you start building succession plans that actually work, because that's what we want, something effective. Thank you. A warm hello from Belfast in Northern Ireland. Matthew, hello. Asahi's UK HQ in glamorous Woking. Oh, we love Woking. You know, I'm sure there are elements of Woking that are very glamorous. Oh, look, now you've been pipped to the post, not so sunny South Africa, but we always think of it as beautiful there, so we're all a bit jealous. So welcome. Well, let me then tell you that we're going to chat for about 20-25 minutes, but spare some space at the end for questions as well. So as you're listening, keep using the chat. Tell us what's resonating. If there's anything you really agree with, if there's anything you disagree with, you're very welcome to. Keep the conversation going in the chat, or if you're watching on replay, do share your thoughts. But I will make some time at the end if you have questions for either Sharon or Hilary. Oh, hello, Anna, Stockholm, Sweden. Fantastic. Thank you. So without further ado, then, let's dive in. And I'm going to start, Hilary, with you, because you are day to day really at the cutting edge of this issue, working in executive search, working a lot with these C-suite searches. So I wonder really what patterns and trends you're noticing in what your clients are looking for and asking you for.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think before I answer the question, it's just important to give a little bit of context around the environment that we're working within at the moment. And in a post-pandemic world, there's obviously been a great unrest. There's been a lot of turbulence. And what we tend to find is when times become tough, there's less appetite for what's deemed to be risk in hiring. So there's three key points I want to go through here. The first is that I see in C-suite hiring that leaders are looking for proven experience. They're looking for presenteeism. And the third point is they're looking for external hiring. So I'll cover each of these in a little bit more depth. But by proven experience, what I mean is they are looking for those that have been there, seen it, and done it previously. So they've ticked all the boxes. They've got profit and loss experience. And what can tend to happen when we focus on these experienced leaders is at times the focus on a balance of leaders and looking at the diversity lens can slip. So this is what we're seeing in the climate that we currently are working within. And that's not to say that you can't find proven experience across all forms of diversity. I don't mean that. What I'm saying is it becomes less of a focus. And it's more about, can the person come in? Do we see them as a low risk hire? So that's the perspective on proven experience. Presenteeism, it probably will come as no surprise to anybody that face-to-face and office-based has made a bit of a comeback. So, it's a lot about that ability to be present, not only obviously for C-suite leaders, they're often traveling internationally, so that international mobility piece is really important. And it's that piece around meeting and greeting people in person, and of course working full time as well. So I can't think of a time that I've been asked to appoint a part time or a job share C-suite role. So there's a lot of focus around being there and being present at all times. And the final point, the external hiring, what we've seen here is that instead of looking necessarily as the first port of call to internal promotions, typically we're asked to get involved because there isn't deemed to be a suitable internal hire. Occasionally, we will benchmark those internal candidates. So sometimes they are involved in the process, but more often than not, we're seeing more of a move towards simply going to the external market for the C-suite hiring. So it indicates to me that there's a lack of succession plans, never mind gendered succession plans. So it's a very, very difficult and interesting environment that we're working in at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating context. I was scribbling things down there because we'll get deeper into some of those things in due course, and I know Sharon will have some ideas around that. But just picking up that point you were talking about, they want proven experience, almost like people are looking for. We know what a leader looks like. They have this, and this. They look like this, and this. And so I wonder what you're observing then about what organisations are looking for when they think, right, we need a senior leader, and that equals what?
Yeah, very good question. I think many organisations are still seeking what I would term traditional leaders. I'll go on and expand what I mean by that. What I mean is those that, so from an interpersonal perspective, display authority, ambition, and can make an impact. So it's around, a lot of this is around drive, and it's an overused word, which I know can be quite off-putting, particularly for females, because we don't necessarily work in quite that same way. And the word drive is not a great one to utilize for that reason. So they are looking for the safe choice, as I've referred to before. And I'm not agreeing with this, by the way. This is just what I see is happening. They're looking for that proven experience. They're looking for sectoral experience as well, trying to tick as many boxes as possible to ensure that when the person starts, they are successful in role. And generally speaking, they're also looking for those that are, I would say, on balance, more extrovert than introvert. So people who perhaps are more vocal than others. And I've known many candidates who perhaps are a little quieter, not do so well in interview processes for that reason. So it's around sort of, as I say, the safe choice. Diversity is still very much spoken about, more so in some organisations than others. And I've had, I would have requests for people who would say, we would like at least 50% of the shortlist to be female, etc. But the challenge is when you're looking for in a particular pool of candidates, it's sometimes difficult in certain markets. Let's take heavy engineering, for example, can be quite difficult to find leaders, female leaders in those environments. So the question I always ask is, can you flex on what you're looking for? Can we open up the brief? Invariably, some companies will say yes, but in reality they mean no. And others will just say, well, no, but we still want 50% of the shortlist to be female. So it's this whole piece around having to look at, if we have expectations of what we're looking for, but we're not really willing to flex. Yeah. And unless we flex, we can't open up the pool of candidates. So it's all around, in my mind, it's redefining leadership. It's around looking at, what is a leader? What does a leader look like, sound like, act like? And there is a gap here. There's an authority gap, which is leading to a leadership gap. And so it's around how do we change that? How do we create a new norm?
Yeah.
And we're a long way from that at this point.
Yeah, well, I'd love to lean into that with you, because you said very openly, so I think people won't be surprised. You said, I disagree with some of what I'm experiencing. And nailing this idea that a lot of people are coming with a particular vision of what a leader equals. So what I'm hearing, I think, is that alongside that comes conscious, unconscious bias towards this is the kind of person that we need. So I wonder where executive search consultants like yourself can help in terms of opening up the discussion, the perspective, the eyes, if you like, of organizations, and helping them remove bias in the selection process. Because often we're dealing with very entrenched ideas that many of us hold, women included, about what a leader looks like.
Absolutely, it's all of us. This does not come down to it being the men. It's the men and the women. So yes, it's a really good question, and it's one that we definitely take very seriously, because executive search firms do have a role to play, and quite a significant one in this. I think the first and most important point I want to make on this is we need to consider, when we're looking at removing bias from the selection process, is we need to consider who is making the hiring decisions, and that be a balanced interview panel. There should be a range of opinions. I've even gone as far as to say to interview panels before that I would rather at the end of an interview they don't verbally discuss their feedback, they independently write it down, and then it is given in, so there's no changing your comments midway through, so that groupthink doesn't take over, or the loudest voice in the room doesn't take over when it comes to the decision making. So this is, that's perhaps a more extreme way of doing it, but I think if there are genuine challenges in organizations, it's a sensible approach to take. Also, just making sure that the actual promotion and selection processes are really clear, really transparent, no sort of secrets, nothing hidden. Gone are the days where we should be making hiring decisions based on, I went for a pint in the pub last night with so-and-so, and that's the outcome now seems to be they've been promoted. So it's around this, be really clear, let people understand what they need to do, and then they can hopefully work towards promotion if it's of interest. Another point I wanted to make on this, which I think is often overlooked, is the language that's utilised in job descriptions. So working with employers to, I suppose, address any gendered language, avoiding the words I've mentioned. Driven has been a classic one, strong is another one, and just really being very clear about what are the benefits that are on offer for the opportunity. So whether we're looking at external or internal candidates, it's quite clear what they're aspiring to. And then coming back to when candidates are actually going through the interview process, they need to focus very much, the decisions need to be based on what's their future potential. Less focus on have they been there, seen it and done it, and more about what are they bringing, what is this person's trajectory, where can they go in the future. So many people, unfortunately, when they interview, they look for reasons why not to hire. It's very ironic, rather than why to hire. And I often point this out, and it comes as a bit of a surprise, but it's perhaps just innately in us that we seek fault rather than the positives. And none of us are perfect, so it's very important to focus on what they bring.
Yeah.
And then finally, I was just going to say finally, just benchmarking internal candidates against external. You might not feel that they're ready, but those candidates with all their faults. You know what they're good and they're bad at, and you don't know that about external people. So make sure that you put the internal candidates up against the externals and get them fairly considered.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I really like the blend there in that answer of some of the mindset shifts that you might need to think about if you're involved in succession planning, and also the really practical hands-on approaches to things like interviewing, feedback, and so on. And Larry, I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to come to Sharon. But I wanted then to think about that dilemma about the internal versus the external hire when you're thinking about your succession pipeline. And you were saying that you're seeing often people looking externally, and you're saying that people often underestimate the people in their midst. So this sense of overlooked talent in our own organizations, how can search firms and in-house talent managers actually help to identify those people who are already there but somehow aren't catching the eye of the people who matter?
Yeah, and I think this probably plays more to internal talent teams, and also actually to the whole of the C-suite, because we need to inspire people to want leadership roles in the first place. I read an alarming statistic that the new generation coming through, that I think it's about 40% don't actually want leadership positions. So that's incredibly high. So we've got a problem before we started with regards to pipeline. But in order to inspire people, you need the right role models in those roles in the first place, which is a bit of a catch-22. But if you create a culture of promotion, so ask people, talk to them, encourage them. It's known that females in particular aren't going to necessarily be the first to put their hand up for these things. They might lack confidence. They might just need a little bit of a push. They might be at a difficult stage, life stage wise, where they're perhaps having children or being on maternity leave. And then invest in your people. That could be training. It's offering them stretch assignments. It's offering them job rotation, and then giving mentorship programs as well. So it's a culmination of all those things should increase the success of any succession plan.
Oh, I feel like we could dive into all of those things. We may yet. I also might well ask you for a little bit of like what companies should be watching out for. But for now, let me bring you in, Sharon, because I've seen you nodding vociferously through a lot of that. And so let's kind of lean into what you're observing with the clients that we here at Shape Talent work with, Sharon, because I know you have a lot of these conversations talking to people in the C-suite. So when it comes to succession planning and getting that out there as a conversation, what are you hearing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I was nodding vigorously because so much of what Aleri said I could relate to in what we hear, what we see in the clients that we talk to, in the organizations that we're meeting every week. I mean, I think the short answer to this is that no one seems to have fully cracked this yet. So there are examples, of course, of organizations that are doing good things, absolutely. But I don't think anyone has holistically cracked gender balanced succession planning, particularly for C-suite. And it feels like a really thorny topic. It feels like something that's just hard to do. There are lots of kind of barriers and reasons for this, even in the most sophisticated organizations. But I don't yet think anyone has fully cracked it. That's my headline observation.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing there is also an acknowledgement, as I hope we always do when we have our LinkedIn lives around breaking barriers. This stuff is hard. We're not saying it's a quick fix, which is why our organisation, Shape Talent, is interested in these conversations and interested in supporting people. So from your point of view, when people are saying it's hard or we're getting stuck, what do you see as some of the key issues that are in the way for organisations?
Yeah, I think for me it comes down to three things. Now, Larry has touched on these already in kind of different ways. I think there's a pipeline issue, so I don't think there is always enough women in the organisation to form a solid pipeline for C-suite roles, particularly when it comes to the areas that are more traditionally male-dominated. So whether it be kind of commercial roles, P&L roles, technical roles. So I think there's a pipeline issue. I think there are biases in how we develop women through the pipeline. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And I think there's also lack of governance and accountability in how we're tracking this. How are we measuring succession planning? What are the metrics that we have? What are the conversations that we're having? What are the routines that we have around that? So I think it's pipeline, it's biases in development, and it's accountability and measurement. If I go back to the biases in development, Larry gave some really lovely examples here. There are all sorts of things that I think are going on that are unhelpful. And I come from a background in talent management myself, of managing succession plans for big global multinational businesses. So I know the challenges of the in-house practitioners when it comes to this. But I think one of the challenges is around being clear on what leadership looks like. So Larry, you mentioned talking about performance more so than potential, about drive and ambition being kind of overly weighted, about the expectation of being in person and presenteeism and global mobility. All of those things, I think, are absolutely problematic. So I have seen and written and reviewed dozens of potential models in my time, and normally people get on Succession if they are in the high potential pool. Not always, but often that's the case. So the potential model is really important here. Often they have words like drive or ambition or ambitious or things like that that manifest very differently for women. They show up differently. Women are penalized if they act too ambitiously. So women don't always demonstrate their ambition in an overt way. So if it's not showing up overtly, does it get missed? Do they get penalized? Are they not regarded as high potential and therefore don't make it onto Succession? So I think there's something in how we view potential. I think there's something in how we think leadership can be done. In many, many organizations I've either been in or worked with or come across, there is that very traditional sense of leadership that Aleri describes. So you've got to do it full time. You can't be job share, you can't be part-time, you can't do it remotely, or, you've got to be there all the time. There's also a sense that you need to have progressed your career in a certain way. So you need certain critical experiences to be collected along the way. And if you haven't got those, key one is P&L experience if you want to be on Succession for a CEO role. So if you haven't got that, if you haven't ticked that box early enough in your career, you effectively discount yourself from leadership roles. And the other one is around I've just had a slight mental blank here. So presenteeism, different ways of showing up in leadership, different ways that it can be done. Oh, that's right. There's a certain mental model that I've come across, which is you need to be a certain age, or you need to achieve a certain amount by a certain age. So it's a heuristic that I think I'm hearing and seeing less of, but it definitely still exists in some quarters. So if you haven't made it to a certain level of leadership with a certain P&L responsibility by a certain age, you're clearly not in the fast track, you're not high potential, not worthy of bigger roles. And of course, that disadvantages anyone that's taken a career break. And disproportionately, it's women that take career breaks for maternity. So there are some mental models and heuristics that I think are getting in the way here as well, and leading to some biases in the pipeline.
Yeah, and you mentioned as well the lack of governance and accountability.
Yeah, so here it's whether or not there's rigorous tracking of succession, whether someone has their eye on the ball and is tracking it. So 10 years ago, when I was last in a head of talent management role, we tracked, the gender balance of succession plans, but we not just who went on the succession plan, but what the conversion rate was of those succession plans. So it's one thing you can easily stack your succession plans full of women if that's the metric you're trying to hit, but actually it's whether or not those women are appointed to the roles when they become available that's the true measure of effective succession planning. So, we had some very basic governance around that. It was tracked, it was on the report that I presented to ExCo every meeting. We then had a quarterly review as part of the business strategic review every quarter with the group CEO. We'd meet with the regional presidents and their chief people officers and talk about a number of things, including succession, including what they've done on the gender front. So there was real interest in monitoring from C-suite, and from not just from C-suite, but from the CEO. So that's what I mean about governance and accountability. What practices and routines do organizations have to make sure it's being tracked? Are the board looking at these numbers? Do they see these numbers? What is the implication if the numbers aren't moving? Does anyone care? Is there a conversation? And who's owning it? Is it just the chief people officer, or is it collective ownership by either the executive committee or the board when it comes to CEO succession?
Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. I've got one more question that I definitely want to ask Sharon, but I'm just going to remind you that you're welcome to put your own questions into the chat. If you do have something you'd like to put to Aleri or to Sharon, now is your chance, because I'm keeping an eye on the time here. But Sharon, then, so you have this conversation with somebody who's come to you and said, we need help from Shape Talent with this. Yes, we understand what you're saying. We recognize some of those key challenges that you've outlined around the pipeline and possible bias and governance. And you say to them, right, here's what I would suggest we start with, or some of the recommendations. What's going to come up in that conversation?
I think there are 5 things I think organisations should check whether they're doing, and if not, look at ways to implement. So one is, do you have a plan for developing your pipeline? So targeted women's development programs, that kind of thing. So are you taking women through the pipeline and helping them get those critical experiences that they need? That's number one. Secondly, how is your potential definition? Have a look at it. What are the words? What are the language that you use? Is there any bias implicit in there? Is there anything you need to do to make that potential definition a bit more contemporary and inclusive? The third thing is revisit the critical skills and experiences that define those career pathways. So traditionally, the route to the top job, the CEO job, is through a commercial route, sometimes finance, often commercial. You need to have P&L experience. Going forwards, is that still relevant in an increasingly digital, AI-driven era? What's relevant, and is it still fit for purpose? So critical skills and experiences. Revisit your leadership model, so how you define leadership, how it can be done, make it more flexible. You know, we really do need leadership done in different ways. I would really encourage organisations to get with part-time job share, more flexible ways of leadership being done. And the last one is about governance. So getting really clear on your governance, your metrics, your accountability, who owns this and how is it tracked and measured.
Brilliant. Thank you. I love the five headlines there that people can really go away and start thinking, are we sort of matching? Where do we need some work here? I'm keeping an eye on the chat. I think I'm going to give the last word to Hilary, actually. And if anyone has a question, now's your moment. Otherwise, I'll just plough on. But Hilary, I wonder, and it might well be that you're building on what Sharon has said, but from your point of view, when you're advising companies on succession planning, what do you think are some of the watch outs that they need to have in mind if they're really thinking about, they want gender balance, they want to see their succession planning through a gender equity lens?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think the key thing here is less talk and more action, you know, the things that Sharon's just referred to. So that would be how I would summarize it. But also just remember that the context of the workplace, it hasn't really changed. You know, the culture of the workplace hasn't massively changed in hundreds of years. And it was, you know, it was created by men for men, and things have moved on significantly. And yet we're still operating broadly within those parameters. And so we really need to question, are the cultures that we're creating the right ones to enable this to flourish? And you know, with only 31%, I think I read in the latest McKinsey report, only 31% of women hold senior leadership positions globally. So we've got a long way to go. So I do think a lot of it boils down to the culture of the workplace.
Brilliant. And I can see a question has come in. Thank you, Jenny. So you've got in right and just snuck under as the, Indiana Jones door closes. Jenny asking, loving this conversation. How are you all managing the backlash against male-focused succession plans? Sharon, let me come to you, and then Hilary, if you want to add something in. But these are tricky conversations and sometimes cause upset and disagreement. So where do we go with that?
Yeah, against female-focused succession plans.
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
I beg your when I say male, doesn't it? Sorry.
It's a really timely question because, of course, right now we are living in a time when there is a backlash against all things EDI and particularly gender equity. We're seeing it from the Ipsos King's College research of 31 countries earlier this year. We've seen it in the US in the presidential election. There's a kind of a view that part of that result was that men weren't engaged by the Democratic Party. So we're seeing kind of this showing up all over the place, a bit of a backlash and a bit of a pushback. And I think it's about having conversations, having a narrative that includes everyone. The minute you just start talking about women or to women, you immediately exclude huge swathes of your organization. So it's about how do we have the narrative, how do we have the conversation that listens to what everyone needs here. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And a question, actually, because we've had one more come in, so let me bring in Anna's question, who says, I'd love to hear more about good examples of companies who have managed to execute role sharing successfully and how to get there. Yeah. My sense, says Anna, is it might be a little bit far away. Again, Sharon, Hilary, do come in on that.
Yeah, I've got a couple of examples, Hilary. I don't know if you know any there, and some of these are may not still be the case, but Aviva, big insurance company in the UK, had a very senior job share, 2 men actually, in a senior strategy role. I think that was a really powerful sense of symbolism. That set. Unilever have long done this. One of our clients, Beiersdorf, have role shares in senior leadership roles. There are companies out there that are doing this and are doing it very well.
Larry, any good news stories from your end?
It's difficult. I would say, the one example I'm thinking of, I'm going back quite some time now, so it's probably about 10 years or more, and that was a public sector appointment, actually, that two females job sharing. So it does happen, and Sharon's absolutely right. It's just that the examples, I would love to be able to give more examples, and unfortunately I can't at this stage.
Well, thank you, because that's why we're here. We want to be able to give more examples. We want to equip people listening, people thinking about their own organizations to take action to make these things possible. And I love the fact that that example was 2 men, the fact that actually things like flexibility, acknowledging that people are parents, is beneficial to all of us. So my thanks to Sharon Peake and to Alari Dodsworth. You can connect with both Sharon and Alari here on LinkedIn. If you're watching on replay, dive into the comments. Whether you were joining us from Woking or Perth or Stockholm, you are most welcome, and keep telling us your experiences. Keep the conversation going. And just worth me saying, I know we're a minute or so over, but our latest blog comes out tomorrow. It's on C-suite succession planning. So do give us a follow, Shape Talent, here on LinkedIn, and that will give you easy access to the blog when it lands tomorrow. And a quick mention, do grab your place at our next Shape Talent event. We have our Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Lives. These are quick hit half an hours. We are doing an in-depth webinar coming up on the 26th of November. It's called Beyond Legislation. New research reveals what's really stopping women from progressing in European corporates. This is us revealing our latest research at Shape Talent, talking about critical barriers, even in countries that are doing really well on gender equity. So do join us. There'll be a link dropping into the chat for you to secure your place for that. And our next LinkedIn Live, whether you are a first timer or a regular, to tell you that that will happen in January. We're taking a little bit of a break for the holiday season, but always keep an eye on our socials, and we will let you know as soon as we have firmed up the date for our Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live in January. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again in our Shape Talent world. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.